now, 7:40. I'm calling the business meeting of the board back into order. We've completed executive session with no action to report. And as we do in all meetings, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'm going to ask Ms. Aruda to lead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Now, I meant to ask if people could remain standing, if you can. If you do need to sit, please feel free to do it. You know that a lot of times there are tragedies in our communities, and we have a moment of silence. But today, it's not a moment of silence, because silence is not working here for the tragedy in Buffalo, the loss of life that was triggered by acts of hatred and racial violence. And I just wanted to to use a quote from somebody that really summed it up, and that would be former Congressman John Lewis, who said, when you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. That's why we're not having a moment of silence here, but we're standing up and we're saying, we don't condone this violence. We're going to do everything we can to heal things in our community so things like this never happen again. So I also would ask Ms. Doyle, I think you have some information to share with the group, and I think everybody could sit now.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Good evening, members of the Board of Education and the South Country community. On behalf of the Equity and Education Committee, I'd like to share with you a statement of response to the horrific events that took place in Buffalo City. Well said, Ms. Hayes. We mourn the loss of the 10 individual victims murdered in the shooting at the Pop supermarket in the city of Buffalo. We extend our deepest sympathies to their loved ones. We grieve together with the victims' families, all those who were injured, and all those who were traumatized by this event. We are profoundly disturbed to learn that this crime was racially motivated. It is difficult for all of us to process this act of hatred, and we know it is especially troubling for the Black members of our school community. Only love can conquer hate. Please, let's all love one another boldly as we move forward from this terrible tragedy. Our experiences have taught us the power of community and resilience. Let us redouble our commitment to our community to promote hope and love for the sake of our children. The safety and well-being of the members of our school community is our foremost concern, most especially our children. If any child in this district is struggling with the trauma of these violent events, we encourage families to please contact your child's school counselor, social worker, psychologist, or principal. These highly skilled staff that we're lucky to have a wealth of knowledge and experience in supporting students with trauma related to violence. There will be resources on our website with links for families on how to have discussions with your children, and contacts for the schools if you want to reach out for more support. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think just to add a little addendum to your statement, all these resources are available to any of our students in any group. You know, the Buffalo massacre was targeting Black members of the community, but there have been other targets of other people throughout the country, And any student that needs help can get it through the resources that you mentioned that we have on staff. So, emergency exit locations. Notice the door and how to get out in case of an emergency. It's a smoke-free school district. It's also a hate-free and bully-free school district. The next item on the agenda would normally be announced by our superintendent, who can't be with us tonight. He's out ill with COVID and is not even able to attend by Zoom tonight. So in his absence, I will announce the results. The budget vote, the budget did pass, and the votes in favor of the budget, 1920. Votes against the budget, 1360. The passing percentage is approximately 58%. The Board of Education trustee election was for 3 members who would fill seats 3 years apiece, and a 4th member who would serve a 1-year period to fill out a vacancy. The top 4 vote getters: Joseph L. Barry, Tara Kavanaugh, Raphael Flippen, and Ann Hayes. So we have in the audience tonight, we have the 3 new members. I'm Ann Hayes, and I'm the sitting member. I'll have the short term, but we have 3 new members who will take office in July. And if you could stand, I'll read your names again, please. We have Joseph Barry, Tara Kavanaugh, and Raphael Flippen. Next, we have board consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the items C1 through C8? Ms. Aruda, second, Mr. Trent. All in favor?
Question? I have a question on the motion. Just a quick question of the Assistant Sup of Budget. We have the claims audit report here for March and April, but not the treasurer's report. Are they coming? And did we miss, there was one meeting that we took the treasurer's report off because we were running so late and we didn't finish that meeting until 11:30. So I don't recall that ever came back to us. I could be wrong, but I seem to think that we're waiting for 2 treasurer's reports. Do you know that off the top of your
I
head?
believe you had 2 in one meeting when we put one back on, and
Okay.
you will have one at the next meeting.
At
I
the
just
next meeting?
reviewed it.
Okay, perfect. And then, just on item number 6, the virtual policy workshop, it says that I was scheduled to attend it on May 11th. That's the first day you could attend it. I can attend it virtually, and I tend to do that at a later date.
Okay.
I just wanted to make that.
Right, and that was because we were approving your attendance. I think this is one of the webinars where there was a fee involved, and that's
Yes.
why we're approving it. So, okay, we have the motion.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
should we be, am I wrong, should we be breaking any of these out? due to
No,
the significance?
because you're asking probably about number 8, but
1
one
and 8,
says
but go ahead.
that one is going to be handled in D.
No, I get it, okay, that's
Okay.
fine.
And so the motion is 1 through 8. It was made and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimously approved. And now, to answer your question about number 8, what we have done is accepted the resignation of our current superintendent, which will be effective July 30th. He's retiring, and July 30th will be the first day he's not here. And we also have approved the appointment of our successor superintendent, who is in the audience, and we're thrilled to welcome Antonio Santana. Perhaps you could stand so that people could see you. We also had allocated a few minutes if you would like to speak to us right now before we go into the rest of the board meeting and the two presentations that we have. So would you like to speak?
It'd be my pleasure. Thank you. First and foremost, I can't begin to express my gratitude and privilege that I feel standing here tonight as a newly appointed and future superintendent of schools for the South Country Central School District. I really am honored. I want to thank the Board of Trustees for their vote of confidence, and I can't begin to express again how humbled and excited I am at this great opportunity that I've been afforded. I also want to thank the Board of Trustees in engaging in a process that was meaningful, profound, and provocative. It was evident to me that the Board of Trustees cherishes this learning community and is dedicated to its continual growth. Throughout the process, we discussed the many things the South Country celebrates and wishes to preserve: its fantastic spirit, traditions, academic achievement, the arts, athletics, and the diversity that made the South Country Central School District such an appealing community for me to want to serve. We also spoke about areas of growth, the need for transparency, fiscal responsibility, the need to address the achievement and social and emotional gaps created by the pandemic, and ultimately the continued advocacy for all members of this collective community. Throughout my career in education, I have had the invaluable experience of working in school systems that have been distinctly different, both in terms of affluence and demographics. These experiences have provided me with the realization that each school community is incredibly unique, and while best practices are somewhat universal, the operation of a school district must meet the specific needs of the community that it serves. This requires a deliberate and systematic approach not only to student achievement, but in the development of positive and nurturing learning environments and school cultures. Rigorous and comprehensive instructional programs that meet the needs of all learners, and a strong focus on professional development for all stakeholders as we navigate an ever-changing and at times counterintuitive world. Above and beyond anything else, there needs to be a constant review of our efficiencies to ensure that the school district is operating in a responsible and cost-effective manner, all while preserving its academic programs and its focus on the social and emotional well-being of the entire learning community. We owe the taxpayers our due diligence. I want to emphasize again to the Board of Trustees and to the public that I totally appreciate the magnitude of this position and the incredibly important role a school district plays for the family it serves. We have been charged with the responsibility of educating, nurturing, and best preparing all of our community's children for a prosperous future. We are charged with fostering a learning environment that not only produces people who aspire to do great things, but who will aspire to be great people, all in a manner that does not undermine community and family values. I also want to note that diversity is not limited to our ancestry, religious beliefs, or socioeconomic status. Diversity also includes diversity of ideas and perspectives, and it's incredibly important that a school district provide a safe space for the exchange of these ideas, the appreciation of multiple points of view, and the idea that despite our differences, we can find commonality in our humanity and ultimately work towards the continual growth and prosperity of the school district. This is the time to be unified. In my experience, I've come to appreciate what an educational community values and the role it plays for the families it serves. The South Country Central School District prides itself in its innovativeness, its diversity, and my number one goal as a superintendent of schools would be to cultivate a positive and supportive professional environment that preserves its past and finds its future. I am eager and excited to the challenge that the office brings. I myself am a product of the public school system, and I will ever be grateful for the role it played in my learning English, breaking the cycle of poverty for my family, and most importantly, helping us acclimate and become a part of this great American dream. Needless to say, I'm anxious to get started and to pay it forward. I'm very much looking forward to collaborating with Dr. Gianni, and I want to congratulate him on his retirement and hope that he feels better really soon. collaborate with the board's trustees, stakeholders, students, staff, and community members as I transition and familiarize myself with the school district, its operations, and the great people it serves. Again, I want to thank the Board of Trustees for their vote of confidence. Now, it will be up to me to earn the trust and confidence of the entire South Country learning community. Congratulations on a successful budget vote. Congratulations to the newly elected members of the Board of Education. I really feel privileged and humbled at this opportunity and look forward to serving the South Country School District as its superintendent of schools. Thank you, and have a great night.
Okay, I had hoped that this would be an opportunity for there to be a physical handshake between you and Dr. Gianni. That's not going to work tonight, but perhaps we could at least get a photograph of the board with Mr. Santana, and then we'll move
Did
forward.
anybody bring a camera?
We have syntax here.
That goes back to the days when we all used to talk. Remember that? That's Congratulations.
How are you? It's been a long time, right?
Okay.
Oh, no kidding.
There you go.
Yeah.
Photographer, put us in order,
You're
because
gonna
I'm
get
sure
short people.
camera
No,
might need
we're
to be on.
getting there, we're getting there. Yeah, you're gonna come
Come
up.
in.
There you go,
Where should I
yeah.
be? I'm always.
You could just scoot
want
over
me
a
behind?
little more. No, yeah, no,
You
you're
want
not
behind or
over
on the
there, you're
edge
good.
for me? You want me on the edge or you want me here?
No, you're good there.
Okay.
Nice and even. Okay, here we go. Ready? I'm just gonna take on my phone too, because it'll be good. Ready? And one more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get this show on the road.
Okay. Did that. The next is the trustee and advisory committee reports. And actually, it would have been a report from the superintendent. But one thing to report is that next Monday at the high school at 6:30, there's going to be a meet and greet reception for Mr. Santana. And it should be a really nice evening because at 5:30, there's the opening of the art show. 6:30, the meet and greet reception. 7:30, a musical review. So we're anticipating an opportunity for many people to be able to meet Mr. Santana, and the culinary students, I believe, are going to be providing refreshments while we're there. So put that on your calendar. Any other trustee or advisory committee reports, or can we go into our,
Are we going around the table or no? Or we just
I'm
ready for-
asking,
Oh.
I was trying to read the body language to see if anybody has anything. Okay. Ms. Felice.
Oh, okay. Again, congratulations to you and to the new trustees, and certainly to our district for passing the budget. We have a very vigorous agenda ahead of us, and I'm really looking forward to working with the new board member and those of us who are remaining on the board. So I think we have a lot to be hopeful for. I attended the alumni basketball game on Friday, May 13th, which was magnificently attended, but underprepared for. There was only one set of bleachers pulled out, and they were pulling bleachers out as people were walking in because there were so many people coming to this event. And it was a wonderful, wonderful event. Raphael had a team. What'd you come in, second, your team? Yes. Yes, second your team. So next year, he's going to win the championship. But I want to tell you what a demonstration of community and community pride. And I wish it was more advertised. I only learned about this alumni game on social media. I did not learn of it from the district. So those are the things that we have to improve upon. And having said that, with respect to the budget, I'm very pleased that the budget passed. I'm disappointed that the budget passed only by 58%. That's the lowest percentage we've had in quite some time. And this flyer that normally goes to the households wasn't done this year. And I didn't know why we didn't discuss this as a board. So again, did you get it to your house?
I thought I did. They went out. If somebody didn't get it, it's on the post office.
Okay.
All right, so it did go out?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's kind of like the
Glad to hear
calendar,
that.
right? Everybody's looking for the calendar. Some get it, some don't.
Yeah, and I got calls at some, maybe it was my delivery area. People were calling that they didn't get it. They were waiting for that paperwork. So I sent them the link to it. But, all right, I'm glad to know that it did go out. But yes, there was something in our district that prevented it from going out. And we should check on that with the Bellport Post Office. Because if a complete neighborhood missed it, that's very unfortunate. And then finally, last night, I attended the concert at Kramer, the third grade concert, and their art show. And what a magnificent performance it was. It's like, I'm just blown away by the talent of our kids and what our teachers are able to bring out of those children. And then the art in the Kramer School, and also the art that was on exhibition for the budget vote. It's a lengthy art show, but it really was well worth the time to walk through, because we have some very talented students. And I think that's all I wanted to speak about. Thank you.
Mr. Trent?
I just wanted to thank the community for supporting the budget, and congratulations to our newly elected trustees.
Ms. Aruda?
Same sentiments as Mr. Trent. Congratulations to our new trustees and to our new superintendent. We look forward to all that you'll bring to our community. Thank you.
Same thing in the concert. I was at the middle school concert last week. I missed the winter concert because of an issue, but so it was the first time. Full disclosure, my daughter is in the band. So, but every time you go to one of these shows, it's just like, really, they're really better than the last time. Like especially elementary school, man. Sometimes that's a little hard. It's really in the beginning, and I think lessons were difficult over the last couple of years through COVID. I was really floored, and like I said, it's my second kid going through it at this point. And I'm kind of stunned at how much better they are now than they were when my oldest was here. Maybe my oldest ruined it, who knows? It's been an interesting couple of weeks and couple of months in our district and a lot of districts across Long Island. I think there was only one budget failure on the island, is that right? I think that's extraordinary. That's a wonderful thing to see budgets pass everywhere. I was given an interesting stat the other day in New York State. Only 520,000 people vote in their school elections. I don't know what the population of our state is, but I think it's close to 20 million. That is kind of really a scary statistic, but I'm happy for those that came out. I know we had an increase probably by double, am I right? Did we double the vote from last year to this year? I think we were on 3,400. Yes. I think it's wonderful at 12 candidates that's going to happen. Obviously, the budget issues and the fiscal issues that we're in brought people out in both a good way and a bad way, but I think the district went through quite a difficult time the last couple of years in this election, and we hadn't seen anything like that in over 10 years. So I'm happy with the outcomes. I congratulate everybody who ran. It's not easy to run. It's not easy to put yourself out there. I think the first time I ran, social media wasn't an issue. It wasn't really around 10 years ago when we had some concerns here, and now that it is, it's hard to get away from it. And it's hard as a trustee, but it's even harder for candidates who don't really know what to expect, and before you know it, shots are flying, back and forth. But after all was said and done, the community did come out. Congratulations to our 3 new trustees and to Ms. Hayes for continuing on. I think I couldn't be happier with the group that's going to help us navigate through what we have coming this way. And I know Ms. Felicia could comment about the 58%. I really thought about that a lot last night, but I really believe. I was actually so excited about 58% when you consider the amount of misinformation that circulated in this community about our budget, and the increased sample size is bigger, right? So those numbers are always going to change. They're always going to be a little bit more predictable. But I think that the margin of difference was 600 votes. That's a lot when you only have 300 people show up. So I was really encouraged, more so than I was discouraged by that percentage. It's easy when you have 1,500 people show up, you get 70%. When you have over 3,000, it gets a little bit harder. And in the budget, I think Dr. Gianni, I wish he was here. This is the first budget vote he missed yesterday in 41 years in education. I think it's his 9th past budget in 9 years. He deserves a tremendous amount of congratulations and thanks from me as a community member. I can't thank him enough. This was difficult, and for his last one to be this hard and to take as many lumps in the community as he did and to still get it passed, I think is remarkable. I know he had a strong administrative team led by Ms. Costa and the rest of the cabinet and the building administrators who helped put this budget through, and I think they all deserve a tremendous amount of thanks and from this community and from me for getting this done, because this was not easy. I don't think I've ever been through one. I couldn't sleep till about 3 a.m. last night. I was so charged up after the results came in. So I'm really excited about the budget. It's sad a little bit for me. I was here when Dr. Gianni was hired. I was part of the board that hired him. So to see my friend of 9 years and colleague, go is difficult. But I cannot tell you how excited I am to see Mr. Santana come in. I think he's going to be an excellent addition. I think he's going to be somebody that everybody can really get behind and follow his vision for what it will be. I talk about my tenure up here a lot. 10 years is a long time. I've been through a lot. I've never seen the board in 10 years come together and agree on something the way they did on Mr. Santana's appointment. And that's a credit to who Mr. Santana is, our candidate pool, and everybody that went into it. So there's, as much as there is uncertainty with our budget coming forward, we have a group of people who I think are well-equipped to handle it and to make sure that while we're handling that, we put kids first. Because if there was ever a negative in the budget cycle this year and the trustee vote, was everything was about the budget and there was very little talk about kids. And that was really, really, tough to take. So I'll try to stop babbling because I'll keep going here. Welcome, Mr. Santana. Welcome to our 3 new trustees, and thank you to the community for coming out and voting for our budget. And thank you to Dr. Gianni.
And Ms. Costa, I apologize, I forgot to say that
I
before
wanted
too.
to echo what you were saying, but also to say this is the toughest budget year I've ever seen. When I sat in the audience listening to it, when I've listened to it over the last 2 years, and the budget presentation that we got this year was so clear and so understandable, and I am so grateful to you, Ms. Costa, for doing that. I'm not going to repeat what was said, but I do want to turn it to the kids a little bit because I've had the experience of being able to go into some classrooms recently on some of the project-based learning initiatives that have been undertaken, and also to hear a presentation that Ms. Doyle organized yesterday in connection with an equity committee meeting. And do you want to speak for just a moment about the 5th graders who made their presentation? And I am just so amazed at the topics that they chose to deal with, and really to examine some very real problems and to have some constructive ideas about solutions.
Yeah, so we had Miss Mary Pettit came with students. She's a 5th grade teacher, and there were students from Miss Galina's class as well that presented on their project-based learning topics. So the 2 topics were dress code. So they were looking at the district's dress code, and they felt that there were parts of the code that were not equitable, specifically to gender. And then the other topic was on racism and bullying. So credit really should go to Ms. Jackie O'Hagan, the Director of Humanities, who worked to bring a Generation Citizen type project-based learning to our elementary buildings. So these 2 wonderful teachers were willing to give it a try and engage in the process, and the students went through choosing a topic, researching the topic, sending out surveys, analyzing data, and then coming to some solutions that they shared with us last night. So it was great to see them present. They were so confident and speaking really passionately about their topic, and there's some things that we can put in place right away based on what the students are telling us. And it's just another example of student voice that we really have been highlighting in the last year and a half to make sure that our students are heard and that they have a voice in what's happening in our district. So it was great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. it was particularly interesting to me yesterday to hear those presentations because within the last week or so, I did do a continuing education program through the New York State School Boards Association on legislative changes. But one section had to do with dress codes. And so I was mentally doing a tickler list of things that I think the board's going to want to put before the new superintendent about things that need to be looked at. And given that the students picked up on that also, means that's something that can go on our list, and I think we can move ahead on that. So thank you for doing that yesterday. That was really a pleasure. No further comments from trustees. Do we have any no public commentary? So we go next to our AP Research student presentation. Ms. Doyle?
There you go. My apologies, I have some.
Good luck.
Sorry.
I had the pleasure of welcoming, where's Jack? Jack Bird?
I'm behind you.
Behind Mr. Briggs, our Director of STEM. He is here with some of our AP Research students. They are here to present their projects. AP Research is our first year with this course, and we're really excited to see what they've been learning, and I'll turn it over to Jack.
Well, thank you, Ms. Doyle, and I want to thank the Board of Education for having us here this evening. Back in 2018, when I first arrived in the district, one of the first conversations I had with Jackie O'Hagan, our Director of Humanities, was, "Hey Jackie, tell me what you know about AP Capstone." And so that was an opportunity where we started having a dream, and that dream was really about putting an opportunity in front of our students at Bellport High School for more opportunities to be involved in advanced placement courses, more opportunities to advance them in their writing skills, their research skills, and just advance them in their learning. We then spent some time both in the planning and the research of the course. Last year we put the program in place with the AP Seminar course. That is the first course of this 2-year program. And so we've had one cohort, and we now have a second cohort in the AP Seminar. The first cohort of AP Seminar is now our first cohort of AP Research, and I feel honored to have some representatives of that course here with us this evening. The course is taught by Mr. Andrew Butters and Ms. Christine Belanti. Ms. Belanti is here today. I'd like to introduce her, and Ms. Belanti, would you come join me at the podium? And she's going to talk just a moment about some of her experiences with the course, and then she'll be introducing students, and they'll be talking to you about some highlights in their research. Mr. Trent.
Can you just tell me how many students are in this course?
45.
45.
Good evening. I'm Christine Belanti, and I co-teach AP Research with Mr. Andrew Budress, who unfortunately cannot be, with us this evening. But back in September, students in AP Research set about their research journey, the destination, their research question, and their path, their method was entirely of their choosing. The path proved difficult, and there were obstacles to overcome, but in the end, they produced research papers which are now part of the scholarly conversation surrounding their topic of interest. So I'm really pleased tonight to introduce you to 3 of our truly exemplary students who are going to give you an overview of their research journey. And they are Alex Brigadier, Hannah De Los Santos, and Rachel Lee. And we'll start with Alex.
Before you move on, just a question for Mr. Burke. So at the Teach and Learn Committee several months ago, several students presented to the committee via Zoom. So that was your first cohort?
That was the first cohort in the AP Seminar course, yes. These students would have been in that same cohort. These are just different students than the ones who presented previously.
Okay,
Yes.
great. It was magnificent then, so I'm excited that we get to do it live.
Alex.
So like Ms. Belante, first off, good evening, thank you for having me. First off, Ms. Belante said that our research could be open-ended, we can choose whatever topics we wanted, past, present, and future. For me, I looked at the world around us and I saw that COVID was a present issue in our complete society today. So I chose for my research question, how did COVID-19 and its subsequent lockdowns impact revenue and growth statistics of local retail and restaurant businesses on Long Island in 2020 and early 2021? For my method, I decided to make it easy since I was dealing with business owners who needed to get everything efficiently and fast-paced. I chose a survey, mixed method, both quantitative and qualitative, and was randomly distributed. I was lucky enough to have Ms. Barbara Ransom from the Port Jeff Chamber of Commerce answer my email, and with her being the president of the entire coalition, she was able to distribute that to each Chamber of Commerce, and I was able to garner responses all across Brookhaven town. So from this survey, I found that all businesses were negatively impacted in some way, both minor and major. No businesses were isolated, and no businesses gained from the COVID pandemic, and they all suffered negative impacts, no matter how big or small the business was. However, some businesses were able to mitigate impacts, whether this be through implementing new procedures or budgeting properly. Business survival was not dependent on business size. Every business, from the smallest businesses that gained $15,000 to $50,000, all the way up to the businesses that are racking up over $500,000, all suffered negative impacts. Many felt that the pandemic presented unprecedented hardships, whether this be emotionally or financially. Through this, I learned that every small business experienced a negative impact in some way, whether it be emotionally or financially, and only those businesses with proficient management and financial skills survived through the pandemic with minimal impacts.
Alex, I want to ask you a question real quickly. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you feel that your participation in the AB Capstone program, both in seminar and research, has sort of changed you, grown you, and developed you as a learner and as a writer and a researcher?
Well, going into AP seminar 10th grade year with the whole COVID year, I didn't really have much experience with researching and research papers, as it all has been very minimal through ELA classes. With these new classes, I was able to establish proficient research skills and actually go in depth and create my own research question, method, find my own results, and draw my own conclusions. So it's really grown me as a researcher in many ways.
Thank you, Alex.
May I ask a question of Alex? Thank you very much for that presentation. When you said the Port Jeff Chamber of Commerce answered your email, how many other chambers did you reach out to? And were two of them Patchogue and/or Bellport?
I reached out to every Chamber of Commerce within the Town of Brookhaven Chamber of Commerce Coalition through their website. I was able to go to the contact pages and email every single Chamber of Commerce individual.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Hannah Del Santos.
Hi. So I've always been interested in science and like how the brain works and stuff like that. So I decided for my research that I was going to focus on neurodivergence, which if any of you don't know, it's just having a brain that functions differently than what society deems to be normal. So my research question was, do characteristics of neurodivergent behavior present in childhood have a correlation with characteristics of neurodivergent behavior in adulthood? So to research this, I used a two-part mixed method. This consisted of survey and interviews. My survey was actually broken into 3 parts. The first just consisting of general demographic questions. The second part was a Likert scale section based on childhood. And the third part was the ASPE quiz, which is a peer-reviewed, published quiz that determines neurodivergence in adulthood. So for my findings, I determined that there was no clear direct correlation between neurodivergence in childhood and neurodivergence in adulthood. So this shows that people's future behaviors cannot be predicted based on their childhood, which is especially useful even in like the education standpoint, because if a lot of people will look at their children and they'll say, oh, they're super hyper, or they have anger problems, or they're learning slowly. But this shows that that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how they'll be in their future.
And Hannah, I'll ask you a similar question. Can you talk to us about how you have grown as a learner and as a writer and researcher through your participation in AP's capstone?
This course actually taught me a lot about procrastination. So, because this course is so, you have to motivate yourself throughout the entire thing, that if you procrastinated even a little bit, you would fall behind. So this actually taught me that I need to stay on top of everything. And it also taught me a lot about research and made me more interested in the research process. And it made it easier to read like these complex papers because I learned how to dissect them and form them on my own.
Very good.
And you've also learned, unless you knew how to do it before, how to explain things very clearly. And you know, the verbal component here, I've heard from both our first presenter and now the second. I'm really, really impressed with what you have accomplished. And I wonder how much of it is the program that you're presenting, or did they come prepared already to do this?
My belief is that the program requires much of the students, and I think that they do grow considerably in their verbal presentation skills. That is a part of the seminar course, that they really are working on those verbal presentation skills. The research course is more about that individual research project, but because they worked on that in the seminar part, it carries over to what they do in the research course.
Shouldn't talk like this at home.
Thank you.
Thank you so
you.
much.
Please welcome Rachel Lee.
Hello. Nice talking to you guys this evening. I'm like very historically based. I'm like really interested in history. It's kind of weird. I don't like to think too hard about it. So when I came up with my topic, I was like, I want to pick something relevant, so I don't want to go too historical. So it ended up like social science-y. It's more historical than most other people's topics. And I think that's really why I like it, because it fits a lot of who I am as a person, especially the entire topic. And I ended up with my research question of how does the conversation around Asian Americans at New York City Specialized High School reflect model minority, and what historical implications does this hold? I'm sure you guys can tell we're in New York, we're not in New York City. I mean, the entire climate here, the like diversity of Bellport is way different than like the specialized high schools I focused on. But I think like comparing the two really helped me pick my topic, because I was like, oh, this is really different, and you know, when there's something different, you want to learn more about it. Because of that, my method was a qualitative media analysis, using like a thematic analysis, because I was looking for themes of the model minority, and through that, we live on Long Island. It is kind of inconvenient for me to go and get like, not a lot of people here know a lot about New York City specialized high schools. I mean, I wouldn't even say most of us know much about New York City's like public school system in general. So I decided to do a media analysis. I focused on sources, like news articles, tweets, videos, to see what people already put out there. And I think that really adds like a whole different dimension, because what people are willing to say in like an interview or in a survey is definitely way different than what people print, what they put out on the internet. It adds like a whole nother layer you never like think of. In my findings, I like searched for certain like themes of the model minority, and the ones I found the most prominent were hardworking, prove the American dream, prove that racism is not real, and academically inclined. While the least prominent were like unpatriotic, threatening to the nation, and not gonna lie, some of them surprised me, some of them didn't. And I tied them back historically because, as I said, I am interested in history. I think a lot of the things we do nowadays, how we see people, social interactions, a lot of it comes back to history. So when I looked at it, I was like, a lot of it comes down to immigration legislation and what the purpose of certain themes are used for. And I found that the most prominent themes are reflective of the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act. I think that was Nixon, not too sure about that. And the use of model minority in its development and creation at the time against other communities as like a political weapon. I think that's like especially relevant in Bellport, especially relevant considering what you mentioned earlier about Buffalo. the world's very divisive. I think we really need to focus on like issues like that. While the least prominent ones reflect when Asians first came to the country, well, use of stereotypes, keep them out like through legislation. It's not prominent as much anymore. It's more useful as a political weapon. And I think that really tied into like everything I learned, how I did things, and thank you for letting me speak here today.
And Rachel, I'll ask you the same question. How do you feel like your participation in the AP Capstone program has grown you as a learner, a writer, and a researcher?
That's a really good question. I think really it ties back to like, first off, obviously it gives you like academic abilities. It teaches you things you never learned. I mean, like they said previously, a lot of the ELA classes we did when we were younger, they focused a lot on like literary, not really like research. So this was like my first exposure, especially with like AP seminars, a bit like whiplash. And I think it was a really good whiplash. It's nice something that we're getting exposed to. But more importantly, I think is like what they teach you. Like Hannah said, you definitely can't procrastinate. And I think especially like you have to learn how to like persevere because you hit so many roadblocks, it's not even funny. And you have to keep going, you need to find out how to keep going. And you need to it's independent, that's a whole like component of research. But the biggest thing is that you have to learn to rely on like everyone else and like what's already done. Because like research is based on building on what's already been done, expanding, and a lot of it's coming down to, oh, if I don't know what to do, I can ask for help, I can look for help. And it really helped me like express myself like, oh, if I need help, I can get help. I have good teachers, I have a good support system, and it's okay. Thank you.
I have
I
a question.
have a question.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Trent goes first.
In your findings, what shocked you the most?
I think the most shocking thing would really be like unpatriotic, like the unpatriotic and like threatening to the nation element. Because I really do think the way people talk, especially about like jobs and education in the conversation around specialized high schools, it's very focused on like they are a threat because they're invading our space, which is like really bad terminology.
So why did you choose to focus on specialized high schools and not somewhere more local?
Actually, Mr. Budrus actually introduced me to the idea, and I have a cousin who goes to a specialized high school. So in the end, it kind of ties into like the political, like the communities in the city are different than here, and like the diversity at the schools are really different. And I thought like I could learn about it in a way I never thought about it. So.
I just wanted to comment about what a pleasure it is to listen to you because your presentation is not just informative and with interesting facts, but you do it in like a conversational way that really pulls your audience into what you're saying and feels like we're interacting with you even though we're just sitting here enthralled by it. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you guys today.
Any other questions from the Board of Education for our panel?
I have one question for you. How do you select the teachers?
So one of the things that was very important to Ms. O'Hagan and to me, as we did our research and visited other districts who had the program in place already, one of the things that they strongly recommended is that to the best of our ability that we provide a co-teach situation because of the amount of writing that the students do. And so in addition to that, we felt like for the research course particularly, we wanted to have, like in our seminar course, we have an ELA teacher and a social studies teacher. We wanted to make sure that in the research that we expanded on that. Mr. Budrus is a social studies teacher, Ms. Belanti is a science teacher, and so we wanted to have that voice so that we have different perspectives from the teaching staff in the program so that the students, as they choose the topics that they are interested in and want to do their research project in, would have the ability to draw from the different expertise of different teachers with different perspectives.
Well, I want to thank you for bringing Capstone to South Country. When you presented it to us back in 2018, I just remember the board being excited about it and wanted it implemented yesterday. And we had to understand the patience that was needed for you to do the research, going around to the different school districts to see how it was implemented. And then watching that growth, from 2018 to now, this is why, consistency in our district is so important, so that we can see these projects through, and you're doing a magnificent job. Thank you.
And I want to share that I visited the class one day, and one of the things I said to the students was, because I wanted to impress upon them that we did this because we had them in mind, and we knew what would come of this. And what has come of this, you've seen here this evening. And so
You've readied them for graduate work. This is
Absolutely.
graduate work.
Yes.
And so they're not even into college yet, and they're doing graduate work.
Absolutely.
So really, it's applauding to you.
Excuse the families.
Oh,
at this
yes.
time. Families,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome to go. Thank you very much for being here.
You're also welcome to stay if you like.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Wow.
What a nice night for our new superintendent to be here.
Yeah, I have to make this comment. Mrs. Lee's presentation on specialized schools, my fraternity brother, my friend, was the principal of Stuyvesant High School. And he was there when all the controversy started with the admissions process and, disproportionate amount of kids were being admitted to the school. So it was refreshing to see a student take on it. It was fantastic. So credit to the program.
So it's a good night. Okay, next on the agenda, we have another presentation, and this is Mr. Shishko from our legal counsel's office of Gercio and Gercio, and you'll be giving us a presentation on pilots.
I will. There's not a chance that this presentation could be as impressive as the one that we just done.
You have big shoes to fill.
I do. I should have gone first. Thank you. I appreciate being invited out here to present on this topic. Believe it or not, it's a topic that I very much enjoy presenting on. It's something that I'm passionate about. I'm a partner at Gercio and Gercio. I've been there for about 12 years. Prior to working to this firm, I worked at a tax certiorari law firm where I became familiar with the assessment system across Long Island and throughout New York State. And the way property owners challenge their taxes. It's a field of law that is very small, but I find it very interesting. And I didn't realize at the time when I was doing that it would have such an impact on school districts and how you budget and how you plan for things. So it's been a very interesting background, and I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you about it. In terms of the presentation, it's really a three-part presentation, a very short background on pilots, what they are. They have nothing to do with flying airplanes. Well, pilots do, but in this context, they don't. Some significant cases that address pilots, many of which our firm was directly involved with, and then also some recent developments and any questions. Any questions you have as we go through, interactive presentations are far more entertaining and interesting in my mind, but feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask any questions you do have. So there are some acronyms involved in pilots. They are generally IDAs and pilots. An IDA is an industrial development agency. That's a government entity that has been created by statute in New York State. It is designed to accomplish inducing property owners to build or improve property in exchange for temporary tax relief. It is a mechanism for economic development through, rather than direct funding of a business, to say we will reduce your costs of doing business as an incentive to try to grow a corporation. Every owner of real property in New York State is required to pay real property taxes. Sure.
Why do you call it real property?
It's a legal term. Real property as opposed to personal property. Real property refers to like land.
Just land in general, no
Yes.
matter what's on it, just land.
Whatever's on it. So the land that it's on, in the context of taxation, it also includes transmission lines, certain utility properties, so things like all of those cables hanging from all the telephone poles, that's all considered real property in New York. And there is actually a real property tax law that governs all of this, and it is totally separate from IRS tax law or income tax law or anything like that.
So owners of real property in New York, it's actually part of the state constitution. All real property in New York State is subject to taxation unless there is an exemption. And an exemption applies to many of the properties, public entities, a school district, a county, a town. Those properties are exempt from taxation. What an IDA does is part of its statutory authority is it takes ownership of property and then it becomes tax exempt by virtue of it now being owned by a municipality. And then they enter into a contract where the property owner or the former property owner pays something instead of the taxes they would otherwise pay, and that's where we get a pilot or a payment in lieu of taxes. That's how the former owner pays something, but usually less, not always, but almost always, less than what they would otherwise pay in property taxes if the property was subject to taxation. But it depends on really the perspective you have. The developer will likely say the property before it was developed was paying X in taxes. As developed, it would pay X plus the increase. I'm paying less than what I would pay as increased, but more than what I was paying in the past. That was not always the case. There have been, and I've talked about a case where a very large property in Nassau County was actually given a tax break where they paid almost about 25% of what they were otherwise paying and actually paid significantly less under the pilot than they were paying at the outset, even though they were induced to build, expand the mall. So why does this affect schools? Why, you're not in the business of doing these types of things, so why does this affect school districts? And if I was here 10 years ago or almost 11 years ago, the answer would be, it doesn't. Before the property tax cap, properties that became exempt from taxation, they still paid pilots, and that money went to the different municipalities, the different what they call affected taxing jurisdictions. And because there was no limit on how schools or any other municipality could raise taxes, it was considered additional revenue. So for many instances, it was simply you had your levy, you had your state aid, and if pilots came in, that was extra money. As part of the tax cap legislation, the state requires school districts to account for pilots in its tax cap calculation. And I'll go through it quickly. And I used to put numbers, and I feel like it's impossible to follow, especially in a quick presentation, so I'll describe it. It's the pilots reduce the amount you levy in taxes dollar for dollar. So if you were going to levy $100 and you get a pilot of $10, you levy $9. And then there is the tax cap formula, which I didn't write it. It is confusing and it is complicated. It is a formula that doesn't mathematically work properly because it goes from step one, even though you would normally do certain functions first. But the reason I point that out is there are three in bold. The tax-based growth factor, if any, comes before pilots receivable. And I point that out because every year when you calculate your tax cap, there are two factors that allow a school district, and all municipalities, because they're all affected by it, they're all under the tax cap, to increase the amount by which you're allowed to levy taxes. One is the tax-based growth factor. That is how much they call your brick and mortar, your real property in your jurisdiction, increased in value. So if your whole tax base grows, your ability to levy taxes is supposed to grow with it. That's part of the tax cap formula that the state legislature created. When they created this formula, they put that growth factor before you consider your pilots. And that's difficult because that means that for a property that gets a pilot agreement, the increased value of that property does not get factored into your tax-based growth factor. So until that property goes back onto the taxable side of the tax rolls, the district and all districts, when I say this district, I mean really everyone, but specifically to you, you're not able to capture that growth until the property is restored to taxable status. So $1 in pilots is not the same as $1 in taxes. That's one of the very significant reasons why. And anyone who knows how interest works and compound interest works knows that if you lose a percentage increase every year for 20 years, that amount can be very, very significant, particularly if it's a very large property. It is a point of contention. School districts and other municipalities have raised the issue with the state. They've asked them to change it. The state seems to have acknowledged that that may not have been what they intended, but there has thus far been no interest in addressing whether that was the intention of the legislature at the time they passed the tax cap. So you apply the tax base growth factor to your levy, then you add in your pilots, and then when you calculate your tax levy limit for the next year, you subtract the amount of pilots that you think you're going to get. That lets you know how much you are going to levy in taxes. Without going through all of the numbers again, that means that for districts that are very heavily weighted towards the revenue side of pilots, your tax levy grows at a slower rate than if you had no pilots. So when I talk about impact of pilots on the tax cap, pilots would otherwise be taxes, so and this is for every tax exemption that exists. If one property owner pays less than they would otherwise pay, other property owners have to make up the difference. So I always say it's sort of like going out to dinner. If you go out to dinner with 5 people and one person gets up without paying, everyone's still got to pay. So when one property pays less, other taxpayers make up the difference. And I say $1 in pilots doesn't equal $1 in taxes for the reasons I said. They're not guaranteed. No school district has to hire lawyers to chase down tax dollars. You get a levy, you get a tax warrant, that's the county, make sure you get that money. In fact, in Suffolk, it's guaranteed. Pilots are not. If you don't get paid a pilot, you have to go to court. So if you're thinking in terms of an investment, it's a riskier investment for the school district to be getting pilots because there's that potential. And the fact that I'm standing here, and I will talk about many, many cases I've had to litigate, tells you that that risk is sometimes real. So you can actually have to spend money to get money that you would otherwise get. And it may not be subject to the property tax lien process. I know that's been a controversial issue in Suffolk County. I won't get into the details of it, but you cannot generally put a lien on government property. So if an IDA owns a property and somehow the pilot is not paid because it comes from a private company, you can't put a lien on that property. The IDA will generally work with you, but again, that is a complexity that's added to what would ordinarily be a relatively simple system of saying, put a lien on the property, they're not paying their taxes. So what's the result? You shift the revenue from taxes to pilots. That creates financial uncertainty, and it can increase the tax burden on residents, particularly if a tax incentive given to a property results in them paying less than what they would otherwise pay. In that case, right back to you have to get the full amount. That means the rest of your taxpayers are picking up the burden that the property owner would otherwise pay. Are there any questions on that part of the presentation? If not, I will talk about some cases. Many of these I've been directly involved in, so I try to keep it as really just the facts. I have my own perspective on who's right and who's wrong. Courts sometimes don't agree, but they are very interesting in my opinion and relevant because they are perfect examples to me of just how 10 years ago a school district would almost never dream of getting involved in litigation over pilots, and that's even if it was necessary. There are now more instances than ever where schools are either forced to because of something happening where they're not getting their money, or feel the need to get involved with a dispute over a pilot because of the impact it's having on the community, and that creates new issues for school boards in general. The ability to advocate on behalf of your community is a questionable one. You can say things, but do you have standing to go to court and take up a cause that's important to a community? Those issues come up in these cases. It's not uncommon for a court to say, I hear the issue. You might be right. It sounds problematic. In fact, it sounds like someone didn't do something right, but school board, you don't have the authority to be here. Have a taxpayer come challenge it. And taxpayers, well, they're the ones who are affected, are often the least able to have the resources to go to court. So those issues have all come up as part of sort of the unintended, or maybe intended consequences of the property tax cap. So I'll talk about the Green Acres Mall. That's a big mall in Valley Stream in Nassau County, a huge mall in Nassau County. In the property tax world, they call them the jewels. The malls are huge. They make lots of money, and they are big tax money. So if a tax cert firm has a mall, it's one of the best clients you can have. So the Town of Hempstead Industrial Development Agency grants financial assistance, which is a pilot, to the Green Acres Mall to rebuild the entire thing. The mall had been paying about $20 million a year in property taxes. The district in which the Green Acres Mall is located is tiny. It was about 40% of their tax levy. So it's almost impossible to grasp that, although I understand, this district has some similar properties where a huge chunk of your revenue comes from one single property. So triple that and then imagine someone takes it away. And that's what this district was facing. They reduced the amount the mall was going to pay in taxes by giving them a pilot for $6.5 million. And they did it based on what they claimed was a settlement of a tax certiorari proceeding. They said the mall has a pending challenge. They say it's overassessed. They should only be paying $6.5 million. So we're going to lower it to that amount, and then we're going to give them an incentive to rebuild it. It was strange because the mall had just been bought for $500 million, had been assessed at $200 million. That's where they were paying the $20 million. So in order to get to that number, they had to bring the number down to about 45 or 50 million, even though the company that bought it had just spent 10 times to buy it. So that gives you an idea of why a school board would say, this does not sound right. So the IDA claimed that. Just so you know, this all ends in an even more frustrating sense. That case is still not settled, and that was 2014. So 8 years have passed. That imminent settlement of the tax certiorari still has not happened. So that was something that board was dealing with. At the same time, that school district dealt with another pilot agreement where the property owner had a cert pending. They were challenging the amount of the assessment on the property, even though they had a pilot, because they said, well, we pay the pilot based on how much the assessment of the property is. So they were seeking a reduction. They got the reduction. The school district doesn't get told about it because they're not entitled to get told about it. And they only find out after they've levied their taxes for the year, and they get a check from the IDA that is short about 50% of what they were supposed to get, and now they have a revenue shortfall. And they say, how is that possible? We were supposed to get X dollars, we got half of that, and the answer was tough. That's what happened. It was a credit. The school said, we're short money. They said, not our problem. So the school said, it wasn't the worst thing because we could absorb it. It was not, that was a smaller property. If that happened with the mall, and we didn't know that, we would go bankrupt. We would run out of money. That's not a financially viable thing to happen. The IDA would not give any assurance that that would not happen in this instance. So the district had to estimate how much they were going to get in pilots without any assurances as to what would happen, knowing that in the past those estimates turned out not to be wrong, but to be correct but invalidated by an action which they get no notice about. When this happens, it becomes very, very political. The IDA comes out and says, we're going to revoke the pilot agreement. They don't say why, they just revoke it. There's litigation over that. It's still technically not settled, but that was never resolved, but the pilot is still in effect. The school district had to intervene in the tax certiorari proceeding. Sorry to get into the weeds on a topic on which I'm very passionate about, but in Nassau and Suffolk County, that's almost unheard of because there is the Suffolk County Tax Act and the Nassau County Guarantee that are supposed to protect school districts in both counties from ever having any liability from property tax refunds or reductions from tax cert proceedings. This district had to intervene because they lost money as the result of that credit, which is really just a refund. Anywhere else it would be a refund, and in fact there's a case from the Court of Appeals, and in New York the Court of Appeals is it's our Supreme Court, it's the highest court in the state. Our trial courts are called Supreme Courts, but they're the lowest, and then the appellate division. But the Court of Appeals actually heard a case many years ago where they said a pilot credit is the same as a refund. So Nassau County and Suffolk County are really responsible for those credits. So in that case, the school had to go to court because they said, we have a problem where if we lose this money, theoretically, we should be reimbursed by Nassau County for it. So that's why they had to intervene in what otherwise would never happen. Most school districts have never had to do that. So again, unintended consequence of the property tax cap is school districts that have never had to do something like that are litigating in a field where they really should not ever have to do that. If this is really for your administrators, but if you know you have a pilot property and you get served with some legal papers challenging the assessment, that is an important thing to keep track of because of this issue. There are instances, many of the IDAs have gotten better, they're aware of it. Some of it's through our own litigation against them, where they've realized this is not a good way to do business, this can be very problematic, so many of them have stopped allowing those credits to happen. But if that does happen, it's something we say, please let us know, let's look at it and see, are you potentially facing a revenue shortfall? The decision in that case is one of which I'm very proud, because the judge came out and said basically, this really should not happen. And one side is saying, you shouldn't be here at all, this is ridiculous, there's a county guarantee. This school is saying we could really be harmed. And the judge said, school, you're not allowed to be here, but you have to be put on notice if you're gonna lose money. So property owner and town, don't even think about taking money from them without putting them on notice of it, and they so ordered it. And that was the only thing we had to go to court for. It's a shame that it took so long to get it, because it's not something that a school should have to spend that kind of money to lawyers to get, but it is a very valuable decision because it's a $20 million property in a school district whose budget really relies on that. So that's something that I do know the system does work. You can get that type of relief, but it's unfortunate that it takes that kind of time and effort to do that.
Could I?
Sure.
At what point would the notice be given?
So that's a great question. There are a couple times you might get noticed. The first one is generally if an IDA is planning on giving financial assistance, they have to give all affected taxing jurisdictions. So that's really every taxing jurisdiction that property is located in, whether it's usually a town, obviously a county. There's a school district, every single piece of property in New York has some school district. So the school district, sometimes a village, and then sometimes some other, if there's a sanitary district or a water district. Any one of those taxing jurisdictions, if you ever look at a tax bill and it shows all the different the breakout of all the rates, each one of those jurisdictions is entitled to get notice of a proposed pilot. They are not entitled to participate in the negotiation. They do not have what we call a seat at the table, but you get notice and an opportunity to present the position. And I'll talk about that, but the other time is if a property owner, and I know they don't own it anymore because they've transferred it to the IDA, but they call them the beneficial owner. They still technically own the property. If they are allowed to challenge the assessment, even though there's a pilot, they are required to file a tax certiorari proceeding. And the law says that if you are going to try to collect from a school district, you must serve that on the school district. And because of the Nassau County Guarantee and the Suffolk County Tax Act, most practitioners don't do that because the schools don't have a seat at the table. But after the Green Acres Mall case and some other cases, sometimes they realize that's a problem for us, just like what the Nassau Supreme Court case said. So they might say, you know what, I'll serve this school, it doesn't hurt me. And if you're not aware of that, you might say, well, we don't have a seat at the table. So, but if that happens, if you get served with any papers dealing with the property, whether it's a proposed pilot or a tax certiorari proceeding on a property that you know has a pilot, we're in public, so I'll give the legal, but it won't be privileged. Send it to the lawyers and ask, say, does this affect us or not? I'll go through this very quick because there are some other things that I do want to talk about. There was ancillary litigation because that district happened to be in a central high school where 3 components combined to do one levy for a high school district, and because of the shift of the taxable property, because the mall became exempt from taxation, that district's proportion of the levy went way down, the other 2 went way up. One of the schools sued the other school district and said that's not right. The court ultimately ruled that it was right, even though it had that disproportionate impact on the 2 other school districts. That was based on a law from many, many, many years ago, even before pilots were considered. So it's one of those strange things. Lawyers make money doing this, but it's a frustrating thing for a school district to say, we have to litigate over a law written before pilots even existed and ask for a judge to sort of sort out why this hurt us in the way that it did. So the takeaways from those cases are that exemption, it's not a technicality, right? So when that property becomes exempt, it's not just, well, we just do it so that they don't have to pay taxes and pay a pilot. It really does affect you. It affects your assessed value in your property, your taxable assessed value. Pilots are a substitute for taxes, but they are not a complete one. $1 in pilots is not $1 in taxes. When that happens, it can have the unintended consequences, and there are certain other areas where what your taxable assessed value affects things like state aid, the tax-based growth factor, and sometimes if you're in fact-finding or something over a labor matter, there's a question of how your ability to pay, and that is actually one of the factors, is your taxable assessed value. So those things I know were not considered when they passed the tax cap and expanded the number of pilots that are given in across the state. There are some other cases that are going on now. I think they're interesting because I'm litigating them, and I tend to argue in front of the appellate division about some of them. One of them involves LIPA pilots. Those have been in the news for many years. The Long Island Power Authority pays pilots. They don't pay taxes. LIPA is a tax-exempt entity. It is not a private corporation. Lilco was. LIPA is not. LIPA pays pilots, and up until around 2015, those pilots were equal to the amount they would pay in taxes. So it was relatively simple. Whatever they would have paid in taxes, they just paid in pilots. In 2015, the legislature capped that figure. They said, we're going to put a limit on how much those will go up. And when that happened, LIPA began really paying actual pilots instead of what they would have paid in taxes. And one of the libraries in actually both Nassau and Suffolk, Farmingdale covers both of them, sued and said, we are entitled to a portion of those pilots because we would otherwise get some of that money. Even though we did not factor it into our tax levy, we did not reduce our levy, that money should come to us. The school district said, we don't agree. There's no way that you can get your levy and the full amount of your pilots. We distribute the money as we get it and make sure you don't have a shortfall. The library brought them to court, and the Nassau Supreme Court agreed with the school district and said, school, you have the right to determine how you allocate these tax revenues, and unless the library is short, they can't come to you and challenge how you decided to do that. It's a significant case because of the impact it has on a relationship with a school and a library, but it's also an example of what I had said before of a court saying, I understand that you are angry or frustrated, you don't think that this is right, but you don't have a remedy. You can't come here and advocate for a change. A taxpayer could say this is illegal, it should be different, but library, you really need to have standing in the form of you lost money. Other than that, you can't come here and just say, I don't like the way it works, change it. And that's difficult when you answer to a community that says, do something about this, and you have a judge say, you don't have the ability to do that. That decision is on appeal before the appellate division. Oral argument hasn't been scheduled, but I think it's going to be an interesting outcome. Suffolk County LIPA pilots. This should not affect this district so much, but it does affect the districts in the town of Riverhead, where the issue of 1020Q, which is the law that capped LIPA's pilots, is subject to litigation, quite a few different lawsuits. LIPA is claiming that that limitation applies beginning in 15-16. They calculate their payments as lower than what the towns are calculating in that. And currently, LIPA is refusing to pay any amount in a taxing jurisdiction that will not issue a tax bill or a pilot bill, and that is affecting the town of Riverhead. It is subject to litigation now. It is an example of, for those school districts that are affected by that, there is the potential of the need to go to court to get money that otherwise would just be part of a tax levy. So that's money spent on legal fees and litigation to do what would otherwise be done as a matter of course. There's another case that we have pending in the appellate division, second department. The Wyandanch School District has sued the town of Babylon IDA and a developer as part of the Wyandanch Rising project. The allegation is that an IDA does not have the authority, the legal ability. We say sometimes, you probably heard it or seen it in some of our memos, we'll say a school district is a creature of statute. You only have the powers given by the state legislature and those that are implied as part of those powers. This case says there's no law and nothing that suggests an IDA can subsidize housing. There's nowhere in the law that says that. In fact, the law did say that at some point and the legislature took it out. So the argument is that's not a power granted to an IDA, so they acted outside or ultra virus, more beyond their authority in granting that type of financial assistance. In that case, the Suffolk County Supreme Court disagreed. They said it's part of a general scheme of economic development. That's something, if they can show a need, then that's fine. They are there for economic development. Also on appeal to the appellate division, an interesting case. Have questions. I bring these cases up because they're real. They are, each one of those is an instance where the school board has had to deal with the question of what can we do about this? How does it affect us? How does it affect our community? How does it affect our budget? Are we, and as the lawyer, I can't answer this question. Are we doing what's right by our community? And I think that's not one of the toughest things for a school board to really answer, because you answer to a community that says, we have an expectation. Those cases each represent a time when the school board really had to think, are we going, is this something we have the ability to take to court? Are we going to spend money to get nothing? Are we going to get something? And what is our goal? And that's really the question that in any of these things, I realize it's a topic that's not something that's, not something people talk about a lot, but fundamentally, your role as a board is to figure out your budget and how you are going to spend the limited resources you have in the most efficient manner. And when something happens where those resources are challenged or called into question and your ability to do that is impacted, you have to make that very difficult decision of, will we set a goal? Will we allocate resources toward reaching that goal? And do we do it knowing that there is considerable uncertainty? It's not, if you build it, they will come. You spend X dollars, you're guaranteed to get something. There are really instances where you spend the money, you fight the fight, and the court comes back and says, sorry, you don't get anything. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And that really leaves every school board with the question, what can we do? Nassau and Suffolk County, the IDAs do not give school boards a seat at the table. So you don't, if you had to sign that pilot agreement, they need you to sign, they will come to you and they will say, we want you to sign off. That comes with all kinds of other issues. We have an issue up in Westchester where they do allow that, and the give and the take of that is then you have to do diligence. When you sign and you say, we agree, now your community says, was it a good deal? Was it a sweetheart deal? Did you give away too much? Did you give away too little? What if they walk? What if that property that's been blighted for 20 years stays blighted? You could have, if you had been more open to the conversation, maybe we would have a development maybe. So the seat at the table sounds great, but once you have it, sometimes there are always questions that come with it. And many times those questions can really only be answered by lawyers and appraisers and other experts. So there is a money factor involved in fighting those fights. If you say, I don't agree with the valuation the developer is saying, I could go and say I don't agree, but that's not going to hold any weight. Even in court, you don't go and the lawyer says, I think the value is this, and you bring in an expert, just like any other issue involving experts, whether it's doctors or defects or those kinds of things. You bring in your expert, they bring in theirs. Sometimes the town, the county, and everyone else, they will all bring them, and you'll have 5 appraisals of one property because there's no agreement, and everyone wants to be sure their diligence was done where they say, I don't want to walk away at the end of this and feel like what we did is not good enough. In terms of those districts in Nassau and Suffolk where you don't have the seat at the table to sign off on a pilot agreement, when you get the notice of a proposed pilot, you really are faced with the question of, do you, knowing that they can do something without your approval, do you try to influence it in some way? Do you have a position? That's a political question for a board. No position. Yes, we want it to happen. No, we don't want it to happen. Or do what you want. Don't ask us.
How have you seen boards respond when they are not in favor of the proposed pilot? What have you seen them do?
So that's a great question. Generally, it starts with a conversation. I'm in public, so I won't go into too much detail, but it starts with a conversation with your lawyer in executive session because that's where you have a privilege. And then it's, what are you looking to accomplish, right? And when you say, if it's, I want to oppose it because we just don't want it, but I don't want to fight it. We just want to be on record as saying, we are opposed to this. That is your right to do that. You could write a letter, you could send a representative to say, this school board is opposed to this pilot. That would put you on record. That has to be part of their minutes, and that has to be part of the record on that matter. If there's a question down the line, the public says, what was your position? You say, we opposed it. Opposing will not influence the outcome necessarily, right? So going there and saying we oppose it, The IDA can say, thank you, they usually do. Thank you, anyone else? No? Okay, and then they vote on it. Generally, by the time it gets up to a vote at the IDA, they know that they intend to grant it. So I don't, in terms of that position, that is almost a formality. We oppose or we support. Generally, I haven't seen a lot of school districts say we support something unless it's something that is very important to that school district and they've been involved in the process. As opposed to just saying we oppose it, if the question is, do we want to fight? Do we want to try to stop it? That is a much more complicated question because the lack of a seat at the table means you don't have the standing right off the bat to say, hey, you can't do it without us. You generally would have to explore how was it done? Did the IDA follow their own procedures? Did they do their own due diligence? Were things done improperly as part of the process? And you deal with that. Someone wants to challenge a school board, you could be right in your decision, but if you didn't follow your policy or your procedures, someone says, the right answer does not mean that you can bypass what you did. So they have to follow their policies and the procedures. The alternative is also sometimes presenting contrary information. They're saying it's worth X dollars. We will spend the money. We will get our own appraisal. Even though we know you might not accept it, you might not follow it, we want to go on record as why we think you're wrong. There's a case that says that an IDA can rationally disregard an expert opinion from one person if they have other information to support their decision. So that implies that they must have something other than just sort of a gut feeling as to what the property is worth, but that is something that I've seen school districts do. If there is a clear indication that a school board is going to lose money as the result of a pilot, and that's usually because of timing, where you set your levy and a pilot is scheduled to happen after you've set your levy, that is a case where you can definitely go to court. And I have had to go to court a few times over those types of issues. So it really comes to what is the board's objective when it comes to these types of projects, and knowing the risks, knowing the potential outcomes, and the uncertainty of getting to that goal. Do you want to allocate resources? And I say resources, there's nothing secret about it. That's money. That's tax dollars that you have to allocate from, from a program or from something else to say we're going to fight this. And if you read the news, I mean, you see how much schools can spend. If you look at these cases involving LIPAs, millions of dollars have been spent fighting over these assessments and pilots. That's all money that that school had to say, we have to, it's worth that fight.
Thank you. And thank you for being here tonight. What I was looking forward to hearing from you is what steps can a school district take once it receives that notice? And by doing nothing, we're agreeing to the pilots or the decisions of the IDA. If we get notice and we don't go, then we have no reason to complain.
Consent through acquiescence.
So and now this has come to light that we want our fair share. That's really what we're looking for. I appreciate that you explained how if we were going to lose money after we set our levy and we realize a pilot's going to affect that later on. I don't think that's where we are right now, although we could be. Maybe we did miss something along the way. We'd have to go back and look, and certainly now that we're put on notice, we want to make sure we don't miss it in the future. But what steps should we take at the moment we are notified?
So the first thing that I recommend if you get notice of the pilot, and it's sort of, you really need some direction given to your administration in advance. It's unlikely you'll have time to call it. You might be able to call a special meeting, but if your administration knows, look, the board wants to take a position on any pilot, you give that direction to your administration. As soon as you get notice of a pilot, I want the lawyers to know, we want a letter written to the IDA saying, this is a matter of extreme interest to the board. We've only been given 10 days notice. We ask you to delay your process of approving this until we are able to fully evaluate it. They don't have to do that. They can say, sorry, you don't have that seat at the table. They tend to not do that. Oftentimes I see they will slow down the process because you've now taken a position. You've said exactly the opposite of what you said before. If we say nothing, we've already told you, we are asking for time. If you won't give it to us, our response will be, we had a very reasonable request. So hold off.
And the district's response is actually helping the entire community. The example that you explained if someone is sitting, goes out to dinner, 5 people go out to dinner, one person leaves,
The other four pick up the tab.
then the
or
other
wash
4 have to
dishes.
pick up the tab. Well, that's the same thing that's happening with our property tax, real property tax, for the entire community. The entire community has to pick up the tab. So the actions of the school board is not only looking at the interests of the school board, it's looking at the interests of the entire district. So may justify if and when litigation money is spent.
There's no question, and that's why, if you've started that, it's a lawyer type, so making a record. You're building a record, you're saying, I asked something reasonable. If someone came to you tonight and said, you guys are making a very important decision, can you give me 30 days to look into it and give you my opinion? You could say no, you could say yes, but if you say no, and later on someone's criticizing you, you couldn't have waited 30 days, you couldn't give them 1 month to look into it. I'm not saying you have to, and I'm not saying that's unreasonable, but it puts the ball back in their court to say, we've been asked by the affected taxing jurisdiction to give them some time. And then the next step would be, you used to have to foil it, most of the IDAs now put everything online. Generally, if I call an IDA, they'll send all the information pretty quickly. Most of them do not want to appear as though they are hiding information. That's changed dramatically in the past maybe 7 years, but they are much more transparent than they used to be. And then that's really a meeting with your attorney. And that a more detailed conversation of this is what they're proposing, this is the information you have, this is how much they're saying it would cost to build the project if they've disclosed it, this is what they're saying will change, this is how much they will pay in pilots, this is the effect it will have on your tax levy. Do you now want to say, we think, one, this is wrong for these reasons, we would like to explore that further, do you want to get an independent evaluation? Do you want to have a meeting? Sometimes if you have a meeting with the industrial development agency to say, we don't want to spend money to do this, it's not really our place to do that, or it's not really something we're fond of, but can you explain these things? And sometimes they will have those meetings, sometimes they won't. You have a caution that if you do that, and they don't give you what you're asking for, they say thank you for your input, and then they move on and do it anyway, they will say, if anyone ever asks, they'll say, well, we met with the school district. They came and talked to us, so we addressed their concerns, even though your position would be, well, you didn't address them satisfactorily, but yes, you did give us an opportunity to be heard.
And do you find it's necessary for that letter to put the town on notice or the county on notice that we are in objection? Is it more effective to come from an attorney, or can it come from administration?
It's definitely more effective from administration, because you're really putting them on notice that the school has a position. A letter from an attorney is generally a demand letter, or we're going to take you to court if you don't do X, Y, and Z. Again, usually a conversation I would have in executive session, but so I won't give the legal advice, but there's absolutely a difference between getting a demand from an attorney that is a precursor to litigation versus a document that you plan to post publicly.
And my final question, because I know others have questions. Do you recommend that we have another meeting with you in executive session to go over those details?
If any school district that has made that decision that you will be actively involved to the extent you are legally allowed, you have to anticipate to be allowed meetings.
Okay.
And it's something I'm upfront with every school board about when we go down that path of, we will do what we can if something happens quickly. You have to be prepared to have special meetings and do those things, because their timeline will not change. They won't stop, or they might, but they generally will not stop based on what a school board is doing. Your timeline to challenge something is usually 4 months after it happens. So if an IDA takes some action and you do want to challenge it, you really don't. 4 months sounds like a long time. It's not. It's putting together papers, figuring out whether there's a case or not, figuring out whether, I hate to use the term worth it, because I understand the community might feel everyone is worth it, but you do have that balancing of how much will we spend versus what is the potential, what is the cost benefit of doing this? And I can tell you costs and potential benefits, but only a board can make that call on whether it's worth it, so to speak. So it is a time commitment, it is a monetary commitment, and it is a very political commitment too. Developments are very political. If a development doesn't happen, I won't comment on whether I think Amazon was a good thing or not, but all you have to do is look at the news. half of the people think the worst thing in the world was that Amazon didn't come to New York. Another half say the best thing we ever did was not let them here. That's a reality of property development, particularly when you're dealing with a property that's either vacant or an eyesore, blighted as they call it. Those are very tough cases, because if that developer moves on after getting some opposition, there'll be a lot of questions of, what was that worth it or not? And those things are, I think, the boards all have to go into those questions with their eyes open and know the potential outcomes and what might happen before, as part of that goal set.
So, just for clarification, the board did do that, and the district did go to the IDA and object to new pilot programs early on in my tenure here. Myself and the business, we went to a couple of them. We're always given, and we didn't really, I don't know that we never sought, I don't think, any legal counsel on it. I'm not really sure. I know I was new on the board, didn't really know much about it. But it almost seemed like it was a done deal by the time the hearing got there. We were kind of getting fleeced, kind of regularly. We showed up one time, they were stunned that anybody showed up to the hearing. They were moving boxes out of conference rooms to find some place for us to sit. So we did do that. I felt there weren't very many pilots back then, but the big one for me, and I talk about it all the time, is always Quality King. Like, that one just sticks in my side. And I guess it leads to another question is, and I think I see it in the beginning on the pilots when you talk about, just explain real property tax again. Is that vacant land or is that developed land? It's anything, all land, no matter what.
Every single
Okay.
piece of property.
So what determines what the pilot payment is, right? Because my big issue is Quality King is a $3.2 billion company. Their pilot payment, I think, is $120,000, $130,000. I think when I first came on the board in the earlier stages, it was like $30,000. There's a company around the corner that I happen to know is like a $50 million company, and I think their pilot payment is, $70,000 or $80,000. So there seems to be a real disparity, and I'm wondering, does the IDA look into revenue stream for companies and what they can really afford? Because that, if you really want to talk about somebody who's benefiting, I'm sure Quality King's profit machine is pretty good.
It's a really, really good set of questions, and I'll try to answer them in order, because there's a couple in there.
I got a few more, so go ahead.
I'm sure you do. I think the first one was, how does the IDA determine how much they'll
Yes.
pay? Is it based, at least in part, on the amount of revenue that the property receives? And really, is there any influence that can be had on that sort of formula? So the first question is, it really relates back to the general property tax system, right? The way that property tax works for all properties, putting aside pilots, is the assessor values the property at a particular amount. The total taxable assessed value gets divided into the amount you need to raise as part of your levy, and that equals a tax rate. In a simple term, there's more formulas that go to it, but in a simple way. So the amount a property will pay in taxes is based on the value of the property. How the assessor comes to that value depends on certain things. It can be based on the revenue stream of that property. It's not based on, so if you have a giant corporation that owns a building, it's not because that corporation has revenues of $2 billion a year. It's what is the income production of that property. Another method of valuing property is the cost to rebuild the building, less the amount of depreciation on the building. So if you have a building that would cost $1 million to build, and it's 30 years old, it may be valued at significantly less than a building that's brand new. And then the third one, and the one that is preferred by the courts, we didn't follow it in the Green Acres Mall case, conveniently, is a arm's length transaction. That courts have said that is the best indicator of value. Two equally motivated parties come to an agreement on the price for a property, and that becomes the value of the property. So it's not uncommon, if anyone's ever challenged their property taxes on their home, to say, look, I just bought the house, I paid X dollars for it. It's assessed at X plus whatever. How could that be? I paid for it, this is the value. And usually an assessor will say, you're absolutely right, if that's what a person paid. And it was arm's length, it was not between family members or something else, that's the value of the property. So in terms of determining how much a property generally pays in taxes, that's how an assessor comes up with the value.
So then I don't mean to interrupt you because I don't want to lose this point. Can an entity like us, a school district, challenge what that assessed value is? Because I can sit here and drive down Old Dock Road right now, and you can't sit there and tell me that Quality King's I don't know how many square feet it is, but I mean, it's, I don't think it's 1 million, but it's probably over 500,000 square feet, of a really nice building that is probably 10 years old. I can drive across the street and find, you know, an auto body shop that's probably paying $10,000 in a pilot, that his business is a scintilla of what they are and the value. So is there a challenge that we can make to what that pilot is?
Very good question.
In the middle of it, not at the beginning.
So if there was the ability to bring that kind of challenge, you would generally have to do it during, when the tentative tax roll is released, just like a property owner, that's your time to challenge. So it wouldn't be, you know, I just realized this, you should change it. You can alert an assessor, right? So you could say, hey, seems off. There is a decision, the case name eludes me at the moment, but I do know it, I've cited it in many of the briefs, that says a school district does not have standing to bring challenges to preserve its tax base. And that's what you're talking about, is saying, we see what we can, when I say we believe, I'm not disagreeing with you, it's we perceive an inequity or a wrong in how you did this, and that affects everyone. We want it corrected, and the courts have said, it may be wrong. You actually might be right factually, but you as a school district do not have the capacity or the authority to bring that challenge. So, good point, but if you bring that lawsuit, generally what a court will say is, you don't have standing. So the case is dismissed without addressing the underlying merits. So you can go to the assessor, and sometimes that works, sometimes you point out, hey, look, this property, identical homes right next to each other. This person comes in, it's 900,000, that one's 400,000. How do you figure that? That does happen, but as far as a legal right to do it of the school district, you don't.
There's no challenge.
And even taxpayers generally don't. So generally, and it probably is a good thing, I can only imagine how difficult it would be to have your neighbor say, hey, his property taxes are higher than mine, I want to challenge his assessment or her assessment as compared to mine. There is a mechanism of challenging generally the way it was done, and that's a taxpayer who does that. But no, outside of, I have to always talk in sort of generalities, because there can be certain instances where it's changes, but generally, a school district does not have that legal authority to challenge that type of thing.
Is there any, and I have two really quick ones, is there any limits to how long or how many times something a pilot can get renewed?
There's no statutory.
There's nothing, right? I mean,
There is, and it relates to your other question, so maybe I'll be able to answer them at the same time. Every industrial development agency is required by law to have what's called a uniform tax exemption policy. And that policy is supposed to be a guideline for how they grant pilots. It's usually not a mathematical formula, but it will often give a limited number of years, a method for allocating pilots. If an IDA wants to allocate a pilot differently than the way they would normally be allocated, they actually do have to get consent, so that they don't generally do that. Sometimes they will have year limits in that policy, but the courts have actually said that an IDA can waive that policy anyway. So,
sure.
So they can say, normally it would be 10, and sometimes you'll see what they call a deviation from the policy, and then they'll explain why they did that. So 10 years, 15 years, 20, and sometimes 30 years. It all really depends on the negotiation that they do with that developer. So the short answer is no, there's no limit, but they may have self-imposed restrictions, and then there's the sort of the practicality of projecting that far out. It is becoming more and more common, especially as developments are getting to the end of the pilot schedules they're on, to see renewal pilots.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened with Quality King was, as their 10-year tax abatement started to come, I don't even think it was that close, probably in year 6 or 7, they decided to put fencing around their pallets, and they got a 5-year extension on it. It went up a little bit, but I'm sure it didn't matter to them. The other example that we had locally that references, I think with the part with the residential, was that Wyandanch?
Yes, all the.
Yeah, so just, we had, like back when we were fighting the pilots regularly, when they were a little bit, they came up more, there was a development plan along Montauk Highway in North Belport. And it was to go up Atlantic, different from what's been developed here. And what they tried to do was put apartments over the retail space to say, well, it's commercial property.
Mixed use.
and it was all 3-bedroom apartments, which means we were getting kids. So we were getting expenses and losing revenue. And that project, I don't think our efforts had anything to do with it, but we did fight pretty hard. But that project ended up dying on the vine for different reasons. But those are some examples from early on, at least in my tenure, where we did communicate. Again, I don't think we had the knowledge that we have now and had a presentation like this. But there are examples, and I do think that there are certain things we can do. But something has to happen at Brookhaven where we can't know a day before they're gonna vote on it, you know?
I didn't answer your middle question.
I don't remember what it was so long
But I
ago.
do want to address it. I
Okay.
think it was
I'm kidding.
because the revenue of the
Yes,
company
yes.
affect the IDA's decision. And it is really a twofold answer to that question. There is the determination by an IDA as to whether a company should get any type of financial incentive, right? So
Sure.
are they eligible and are they worthy, so to speak? And that may involve a question of how much money did they make, how big of a company are they? Then the question really comes to, is this development specifically financially viable? So it is not uncommon that, I think their perspective would be, and I know that doesn't seem like you're friendly towards the IDA, so I don't think I'm advocating for it, but the perspective would be, it doesn't matter if they're a multi-billion-dollar company. If this development is not financially sound, why would they do it? They're not going to spend $10 million to build a building that's going to bring in only $8 million in revenue. If that's a value and we can get the $8 million there, then there might be some value. So it is a factor, but generally I don't think an IDA would say, look, you're such a big company, you should pay more than someone else. I think they would say, this development on its own, the four corners of that development, is it financially viable? What would you need to make it financially viable? Again, they rely heavily on the developers for this information. So at first, they're going to give biased information. They're going to say what's most beneficial, just like when you go for a mortgage and they say, the bank wants to see all of these wonderful things. Can you say that? And hopefully you say, no, I'm going to tell you the truth. But when it comes to numbers, that really is very heavily dependent on the developer reporting that information. And then the pilot itself, there are multiple ways to do them. It used to be more common for them to say, just take the assessment of the property, figure out what the tax rate would be, and then multiply it by a percentage. So we give them a 40% reduction in year one, 44, 40, 50, and so on, add 6% each year until it goes to 100. More common, and actually probably better for certainty purposes, have been pilots that are, it's just a fixed amount. It's going to be 100,000 year one, 106,000, 110. The criticism of those types of schedules is, particularly when it's 30 years or 20 or 30 years, is that a realistic capture of how much by year 20 that property would be paying? Is it realistic to think a 4 or 6% increase each year, or even less, is really what they would be paying? A lot of property owners say, that's not realistic. My taxes have gone, they go up by more than that. So that is all factored into it. They do have discretion when it comes to that. The IDA cannot change your portion of whatever you would get. So if you ever look at a tax bill and you figure out what portion is the schools and the water districts, they can't say, school, you would normally get, say, 60% of a tax bill. You're only going to get 50% of this pile, where we're going to give more to some other jurisdiction. In order to do that, they have to get all the jurisdictions to sign off. That was a big controversy in the Long Beach thing, if you read any articles about what was going on there, because there the city was involved and they wanted more of the pilot than, I believe it was the city.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
You did. That was great. Thank you.
I have two questions. First, you commented about assessed values of all properties and how that affects basically the tax base, and when the IDAs and pilots are factored in, it does affect the calculations for New York State aid. So I'm going to ask you to comment a little bit more about that issue. But the second issue is there any legislation pending in Albany to address this very complicated interaction or lack thereof between the pilots, the IDAs, the tax cap, and the entire system of funding public education in the state of New York?
Those are two very, very good questions. I'm laughing because I think this school board has probably spent more time tonight asking questions about this topic than the legislature does when they pass these laws. So I realize how frustrating that can be. The answer to your second question is there are many proposed laws. Property developers have lobbyists. Right? If you look at the economy, particularly of Long Island, but really of all of New York State, real estate and construction go hand in hand. All the construction, most of it involves real estate. There's not a lot of construction anywhere else. So those, those industries, they lobby. This is an important part of what they do. So there is, the legislature hears a lot from those industries about how things get done. The IDAs do consider jobs created, and oftentimes they'll say even temporary jobs. Is it 100 construction jobs for a year and a half for, for this project, or for a year, or however long? So there's legislation sort of in support of more tax breaks and more financial assistance, and then there is legislation to address these issues. When these cases come up, it's not uncommon that New York State school boards, every year, I've had to write quite a few of them for them. They are legislative proposals for how to address issues with LIPA, how to address this tax cap issue. They are there. The legislature tends to get them, and oftentimes they will make it to a committee. And I don't know how many of you have ever looked up a bill. School board members tend to do it because you'll find something, you'll hear something, you say, oh, I'll Google that. And you'll see different websites will say, where the bill is. It's not like that old cartoon with the bill in Capitol Hill. It starts in one spot and then it goes somewhere else. And oftentimes you'll see a bill and it says, referred to committee X, and it's tax, or referred to committee is generally the graveyard of a bill. That's, get back to us on whether this is a good thing or not. So oftentimes if you do find the legislation that was intended to address some of these issues, particularly the way the LIPA pilots are calculated, there were many bills proposed that addressed the issues that came up in that litigation. I was heavily involved in the litigation. I spoke to many of the local politicians about how the schools could resolve that. Even some of the legislation that I can't speak for LIPA. I don't think they necessarily disagreed with the proposed legislation, but they didn't take a position. A lot of it just does not make it past a committee of some kind. Without commenting too much on the politics, every time a law is passed to address a concern of one group, it affects another group. So that is always factored into these things. I'm not a lobbyist, so I can't say what my recommendation would be in terms of how you would go about getting the state to change. It starts at the local level, usually, especially when it is a major issue and it's affecting the district. You do have that ability to reach out to your local legislators and say, hey, what are you doing about this? It's difficult, given the size of the state, to get a local issue that affects one sort of isolated area to addressed at the state level. But there have been some changes. One of the significant ones, one of the reasons why IDAs are more transparent, is there was a law passed that said they had to be. The state said you have to go and really give more information out. In terms of your question about state aid, those figures, the assessor does them. Once your final tax roll is done, that all gets put into this gigantic, tens of thousands of pages. It all gets sent to the Office of Real Property Tax Services. They keep track of everything that at some point gets integrated into that formula. And if you're going to ask me questions about how the foundation aid formula works, I'm not going to answer that, because that is a very complicated question. I probably couldn't explain it offhand because I don't completely understand it. But ultimately, that data does go to the state. It does affect your state aid ratios in some way. And I'm hesitant to say directly, because it's very hard to say, because it really depends on every other jurisdiction, because ultimately the state aid formula is based on your value in this district versus the other values and other factors of all the other districts across the state. So while it might have affected you specifically, you might have another school district that has had a bigger property come off the tax rolls, and that sort of balances it out or in some way, shape, or form. So I didn't want you to think that it's like a direct, they give you a pilot and now the state says, great, we're cutting your aid. It is just a function of the way those formulas work.
Thank you. Wow.
I've talked too long.
No, I wasn't
No,
gonna
so I
say
think-
that. I just said that this has been a night that's been chock full of some interesting presentations. So I'm grateful that you came in to speak to us, and I think we'll probably be having some discussions among ourselves about how, if in any way, we need to proceed, so.
I very much appreciate being invited out. It's always an honor to be asked to present to the school board.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's see if I can combine some of these so we can move quickly.
One more on the bus would be nice.
Okay. Board consent agenda on curriculum, G1 through G3. Is there a motion to approve? Ms. Felice, second, Mr. Trent. I do have one question of Ms. Doyle on the field trip. Could you tell us what is the educational component of that field trip? I saw some papers in connection with this, and not being in education, I'm not sure, but it looked like it was a STEM project that had some physics
Yeah, so
problems
there's-
associated with it.
It's meant to be multidisciplinary, so there's some history about the factory, and they're given a map and explore. They build in some STEM and physical and wellness activities throughout the day. So it's meant to be celebratory trip, but with an educational component to it as well.
Okay. No further questions, all in favor? It's unanimously approved. Next, we have a consent agenda on personnel, items H1 through H7. Is there a motion? Ms. Felice, second. Mr. Parker, questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? This is, okay. It's unanimously approved. Next is I. I1, we're gonna carve out and handle separately. This is a tax anticipation note resolution that requires a roll call vote. John, does this need to be read out loud, the resolution?
I would recommend that this be read out loud, so there's a roll call vote on it.
Okay.
Tax anticipation note resolution of the South Country Central School District at Brookhaven, New York, adopted May 18, 2022, authorizing the issuance of not to exceed $36 million tax anticipation notes in anticipation of receipt of taxes to be levied for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, resolved by the Board of Education of the South Country Central School District at Brookhaven and County of Suffolk, New York, as follows. Section 1, tax anticipation notes, hereinafter called notes, of the South Country Central School District at Brookhaven in the County of Suffolk, New York, hereinafter called District, in the principal amount not to exceed $36 million, and any notes in renewal thereof are hereby authorized to be issued pursuant to the provisions of sections 24 and 39 of the local finance law, constituting chapter 33-A of the consolidated laws of the state of New York, hereinafter called law. Section 2, the following additional matters are hereby determined and declared. A, the notes shall be issued in anticipation of the collection of real estate taxes to be levied for the school purposes for the fiscal year commencing July 1, 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023, and the proceeds and notes shall be used only for the purposes for which such taxes are levied. B, the notes shall mature within the period of 1 year from the date of their issuance. C, the notes are not issued in renewal of other notes. D, the total amount of such taxes remained uncollected at the date of adoption of this resolution. 52 shall be prescribed by the section 52 of the law and shall be general obligations of the district, and the the faith and credit of the district are hereby pledged to the punctual payment of the principal of and interest on such notes, unless the notes are otherwise paid or payment provided for, an amount sufficient for such payment shall be inserted in the budget of the district, and a tax sufficient to provide for the payment thereof shall be levied and collected. Section 4. Subject to the provisions of this resolution and law, and pursuant to the sections 50, 56, 60, and 61 of the law, the power to sell and issue the notes authorized pursuant hereto and any renewals thereof, and to determine the term, the form, contents, including the manner of execution of such notes, and to execute tax certificates related thereto, is hereby delegated to the President of the Board of Education, the Chief Fiscal Officer of the district. B, the Board of Education shall be given written notice of any determination by the President of the Board of Education of the district to sell and issue tax anticipation notes pursuant to this tax anticipation note resolution. Such written notice shall be provided to the district clerk at least 10 days prior to the sale of any such tax anticipation notes. Immediately upon the receipt of written notice, the district clerk shall deliver such written notice using electronic means as hereinafter defined to each member of the Board of Education. The foregoing shall not otherwise limit the delegation of the powers of the duties set forth in subparagraph A of this section 4 to the President of the Board of Education of the district. Electronic means shall include email, facsimile transmission, or another method or system determined by the district clerk and approval by the Board of Education as available for use in connection with delivery of such notice. Section 5. The notes shall be executed in the name of the district by the manual signature of the Board of Education, and the President of the Board of Education, the Vice President of the Board of Education, the District Treasurer, the District Clerk, or any such other officer of the district as shall be designated by the Chief Fiscal Officer of the district, and shall have the corporate seal of the district impressed or imprinted thereon. Such corporate seal may be attested by the manual signature of the district clerk. 6, period, this resolution shall take place immediately. Adoption of the foregoing resolution was seconded by a board member duly, so that's the substance of the resolution.
Okay.
It's a mouthful, huh?
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
So now that the resolution has been read, is there a motion to approve? First, second, and then questions.
I will make the motion to approve, and then I have a question.
Okay. Is there a second? Mr. Trent, your question.
Thank you. To the attorney, section 4B, can you speak to any changes, enhancements to our operation that was made to that section with respect to the 10-day notice? Can you just speak to that?
Sure. So there is an authority to delegate to the President of the Board of Education as Chief Fiscal Officer actions with respect to the sale and issuance of notes. This resolution was modified from other similar resolutions that provides that the Board of Education shall receive written notice from the President of the Board of Education of the determination to sell and issue tax anticipation notes. And this written notice shall be provided to the district clerk at least 10 days prior to the sale of such tax anticipation notes. Immediately upon that written notice, the district clerk sends that written notice by electronic means to the members of the Board of Education. So this is an additional step that provides for the Board of Education notice of the actions of the President of the Board of Education as Chief Fiscal Officer. That is a limit on what is typically a blanket delegation.
And this is what we've asked to have included because of the way that the capital bonds were handled back in the 2006 to 2010 era. And so this is a way for the board to be on notice of exactly what will be the terms of the sale of the note or the bond. And I think that Ms. Costa had been in contact with bond counsel about it, and they're the ones that got involved and did the drafting here, so that we're tightening up, doing better practices than had happened in the 2006 to 10 era. We're making an improvement here, and this will be language that can go into any bond resolutions in the future. It's
This definitely provides a way of record keeping and a paper trail with respect to this aspect of this very important function of the board.
So, we've had a motion, a second, some questions, and all in favor of, we've got to do the roll call here, so I think we've got to get Ms. Flynn involved, so you can save your voice. Yep.
Okay, so roll call vote. Melissa Aruda, absent for vote. Cheryl Felice.
Yes.
Clyde Parker.
Yes.
Chris Puccini.
Yes.
Cameron Trent.
Yes.
Ann Hayes.
Yes.
Unanimous with one absent for vote.
So, we can now declare this resolution adopted. Is that the next step, John? That's it? Okay. So now we're gonna do on the board consent agenda on business, items I-2 through I-15. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Trent, second, Ms. Felice. Questions, discussion, seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. No cards for public commentary? And closing remarks?
One quick closing remark. I'd just like to thank the president for the initiative that you took with the TAN resolution to improve upon the operations here at the Board of Education based on what we've learned over these past 7 months.
Well, I want to just add to that I really appreciate Ms. Costa's involvement here and her interaction with bond counsel, because in the process of doing this, not only did she have the interaction, but when I raised more questions about it, she could go back and express what our concerns were. And this is not the first version of what they came up with, but what they've done is a vast improvement, in my opinion.
I just wanted to add, what the resolution doesn't say, but just maybe the board should understand, the notice that the board president provides immediately to the board of the actions that they're taking, that at that moment would be when you need to convene a special meeting of the board to take an action, whether it be to take away the powers of the board president or to do something different with the notes before the sale date that would happen in 10 days. So that piece, that's not overtly said here, but that's why you're getting the notice, because that is at the time when you would review what action was being taken, because you have a very short window to take an action to speak up for that not to move forward.
Thank you for that. So then a question of council. When we get the notice, who's responsible for, you would be aware of the notice as well? Would you not?
I would not be ordinarily aware of the notice. If the board members are aware of the notice, any board member can call a special meeting of the board with 24 hours notice. So if any board member sees that the president of the Board of Education is not using her authority in a manner that's consistent with the resolution, that would be incumbent upon the board member to call for a special meeting, and that would be a call to our office. We would attend that review, we call bond counsel, and we review that issue with the Board of Education.
But in addition, with the RFPs that are going out, like for bond counsel, maybe part of their responsibility would be any time that there is a bond pending, they make sure that the appropriate notice went to the various board members.
could add that, the RFPs haven't gone out yet, we could add that.
Okay, and that would then tighten anything falling through the cracks either.
Okay. Sounds good, thank you.
Okay. So, thank you for your time. I appreciate hearing from Ms. Doyle about some of the curriculum activities and also putting together the statement, helping put together that statement from the equity committee that they recommended. I appreciate Ms. Costa doing all this work with regard to bond counsel and getting improvement in all aspects of how the finances are being handled. And I thank our Mr. Santana for sitting through this very long meeting, but I cannot promise that meetings in the future will be any shorter. And thanks to everybody else. So I know there's a motion to adjourn,
No, there
Mr.
is.
Trent, and a second by Mr. Parker. All in favor? We're now adjourned.